Tim here. This is an old twin headboard that we made quite a few years ago. One of my children and I, we made it for a 4-H project, and they used it as a headboard for their bed. Well, those children are now in their late 20s, early 30s. They no longer are in need of a twin-size headboard. So we're going to make a hall tree, or you may call it a mudroom bench, out of this old headboard. Let's give it a try here on Ask Neighbor Tim. Now, usually the bench elevation is somewhere around 18 or 19 inches. So I'm going to see is where this one cross piece is here. We're at about 19 and a half or so inches. I'm going to get that bench to come right up underneath here, and then I think that'll give me a good backstoppers. So that box I'm going to make is going to be about 19 inches high, 33 3/4 inches long, and I think I'll come out about 12 inches or so. Here's the challenge I have though. I have all these 1x8s by 24 inches, and that's what I want to use to make that bench. So I've got to figure out how to make that bench structurally sound using 1x8 by 24 inch pieces. I used this trick when we fixed the hole in the wood floor. And what I said is always have some pieces of wood laying around. I always like to write down my dimensions because I cannot remember dimensions, but I'll always use a piece of wood to write those dimensions down. So like what we talked about earlier. That box is going to be 33 3/4 inches long. It's going to be 19 inches high, and it's going to be 14 inches wide. All right, now I'm ready to rip that first piece. I'm going to start working on my frame pieces. I'm going to use, as I said, I'm going to use this 1x8 here as my base piece for the entire bench. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to make my frames 2 1/4 inches. So I'm going to rip them at 2 1/4 inches. I always like to measure just to make sure, and I've got to go to the inside of the blade since that's the dimension that I want to ultimately have. So it looks good at 2 1/4 inches. The other thing I always do is when you rip, you want that saw blade to come out. I usually like to come out about 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch above the surface of the wood, and that gives me a really nice cut when I'm ripping. All right, everything is ready to set. I think I've got my measurements. Let's start sawing. Now I've ripped every one of these to 2 1/4 inches wide. Remember, these are all 24 inches long, so I'm going to have to cut these to length now. Every one of these has been cut to 18 1/4. Now I'm going to start working on the corners, and what I'm going to do is just a simple butt joint. So I'm going to put these two together. I'm going to run a bead of glue down this one here, and I'm just going to use some 2-inch finish nails to finish it off. Now I am going to pre-drill my holes for my finish nails. This is pine. It's a fairly soft wood. It works really good. And I'm going to put 3 holes here, but I like to pre-drill just to make sure I don't split the wood. I've cut these vertical pieces at 18 1/4 inches. Now I've got to set my horizontal distance. Now you remember, each one of these are 2 1/4 inches wide, so if I add those two together, 2 1/4 inches, 2 1/4 inches, that's 4 1/2 inches. If I subtract that from 14 inches, which is the width I wrote down that I want to achieve ultimately, I should be at 9 1/2 inches for my space. I always like to set them apart and measure just to make sure. Yep, 9 1/2 inches. That's what I'll cut next. I've cut that 9 1/2 inch piece, and that's going to be the piece that's going to be my spacer. That'll fit in like this. I've also cut another piece approximately 12 inches. That's going to be my backer. That's what I'm going to fasten these vertical pieces in like this. Now this is going to be the top of my table. I flipped it over so I can get a good flat surface, but this is how it's all going to go together. It'll work out really nice and be structurally sound. One of my faults is that I don't use plans a lot of the time. I just start thinking through things and start assembling as I'm thinking through it. So what I decided is that I went ahead and cut a bunch more of the 2 1/4 inch wood, and I'm simply going to fit it in here. I'm going to overlap like this. I'm going to countersink some screws. I'm going to glue these together and countersink some screws. There's a 2-step process to countersinking screws in a piece of wood. The first is to put your pilot hole in, and that's a hole that should go all the way through. I always like to use a drill press because I get a good straight shot right through. Now the second step is to drill the hole that's going to allow the head of the screw to go down into your board. Now I'm going to want my screw probably to go about this deep into that wood that's below it. And what is that, about 3/4 inch? So that's about how far, if you can see a little notch there, maybe not, but that's about how deep I want this to go. Now I'm going to put these two together. I've already marked it down here to where I have to have the two joined together for my 30-inch distance. I make sure it's nice and tight. I take my screw here, find my countersunk hole here, go with my drill, and I'll have those two fastened together here in just a little bit. I have everything put together now. I just have this one vertical piece to fasten. I've got everything glued. I'm using this air nailer. It makes it nice and easy, a finish nailer. We're ready to go to the next step. When using the air nailer, here's where not to be when hitting the air nailer trigger. Now I've put a bottom rail here that I'm going to use as my nailing edge, and this is for the bottom of the box. And so you can see I've cut these at 10.5 inches. They fit really nice inside there. This one here will go just like this. I'm going to glue them, I'm going to nail them, and I've got a good solid bottom. Well, I like the way these vertical pieces ended up working out real well. I cut those all at the same length. I think it was 16.5 inches. Worked out really nice. Went around the entire side, was able to enclose my box. I put some trim pieces on because I thought it just cleaned it up a little bit. Put a frame around the top because I really like the way that gives it a nice, solid, squared off feel. Then, of course, we have our hinged lid. I think it really turned out well. When I gave it that coat of paint, one of the things I did after that first coat of paint is I really gave it a nice light sanding. I think I used about a 400 grit sandpaper. After that first coat of painting, lightly sanded it, then I rolled in that final coat. It gives it a really smooth finish after that. Well, we're done. Remember, we took that headboard, that twin size headboard, and we painted it black. We did cut those spindles off. I think it gave it a little bit more of a country feel to it. And we built this really nice box that we could attach to it. This box does a nice job. I think there's a lot of storage in there for, oh my goodness, all things like boots and gloves and hats and galoshes and all those type of things. But this really turned out nice. I'm really happy with it. Go ahead and try something like this yourself. If you've got a piece of furniture laying around the house that's really not doing anything, see what you can do with it. Give it a try. If you have any questions, put them in the comments there. I'll see what I can do as far as answering them. But anyway, give it a try. Don't be scared. Have a great day. This is Tim for Ask Neighbor Tim.